I've lived long enough to believe that an airplane seat couldn't possibly teach me anything new. At my age, people assume I only care about my health, my family, and a few old awards hanging on the wall. But that afternoon, on a flight from Los Angeles to New York, a stranger stole my seat quite literally and forced me to look back at my entire life. I didn't board that plane as a star, nor as an owner, just an old passenger holding a ticket like everyone else. No name tag, no entourage. I've always believed character matters more than a business card. But then I saw him. Young, confident, arrogant. He slid into my seat, leaned back, and ignored every hint sent his way. I could have called the flight attendant, made a phone call, mentioned my name, or reminded him that I owned a good part of the airline. But I didn't, because what bothered me that day wasn't just the seat. If you want to know what really happened on that flight and what it forced me to confront, then come with me. That day, I dressed so simply, no one bothered to look twice. Faded jeans at the knees, a half-buttoned shirt, a thin jacket, and old boots that had walked through more film sets than some young actors walk into theaters. No sunglasses, no hat, nothing to remind people. I'd spent a lifetime in front of a camera. Just an old man with a small bag, a first-class ticket, and one wish. A quiet flight from Los Angeles to New York. Lax that afternoon was crowded but not chaotic. White ceiling lights, the roll of suitcase wheels on the floor, announcements echoing like the heartbeat of a giant machine. I passed security quickly, too familiar with the routine to care. I grabbed a cup of black coffee and watched the planes outside the window. The sun was sinking, the light dimming, the whole runway coated in a cold metallic glow. When first-class boarding was announced, I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the gate. No one asked for a photo. No one called my name. I didn't feel sad about that. Live long enough in this industry, and you'll learn that solitude is a rare gift. I handed my boarding pass to the agent, heard the familiar beep, and walked down the jet bridge. The moment I stepped into the first-class cabin, I sensed a different atmosphere. Not the smell of new leather or expensive wine, but the distinct air of people who believe their time is worth more than everyone else's. Phones lighting up, urgent voices, the words deadline, deal, investor overlapping. I'd been around this type my whole life. I could recognize them even from behind. I glanced past the first row, then stopped at the second. Seat 2A should have been empty. It was on my ticket, on the screen when I booked it, in my mind when I imagined sitting by the window watching the city shrink below. But 2A was not empty. Someone was sitting there. He was much younger than me, probably my son's age. A fitted suit, a wristwatch meant to be seen rather than used. His laptop was open, his phone beside it, a drink with melting ice on his tray. He sat as if the seat had been made for him, as if the cabin were his private office, as if the entire world was just background noise for his work. There are moments in life when you know instantly you're stepping into a story that won't end simply. It begins with tiny details, the way someone places their bag, the way someone turns their head when they should look you in the eye, the way a person takes something and pretends not to notice. I stood beside the seat, looked at the small 2, printed on the panel, then at the man occupying the place that should have been mine. I cleared my throat, gently. No one turned. The air vent hummed, seatbelts clicked. A child laughed in the cabin behind us. Ordinary sounds, suddenly sharp, as if someone had turned the volume up. Something was shifting, not in the plane, but inside me. In a split second, I had a choice. Ignore it, find another seat, let this become just a small nuisance in a long day. But an old voice in my head spoke up. How many times in your life have you stayed silent while someone pushed past the line? The moment I chose not to stay silent, I knew I had stepped through a door. What happened next would never be just about a seat. If you want to know where it led me, we'll get there. But first, we need to talk about the man sitting in my seat. And he looked up when I stood there, but not with the look of someone realizing they'd sat in the wrong place. It was the look of someone being interrupted. A quick, cold glance, then back to his laptop as if I were a late drink order. I stayed still for a few seconds. At my age, you don't need many words to read a person. His shoulders leaned back, his chin slightly raised, his movements slow but deliberate, the kind of man used to having others step aside, their space, their seat, even their dignity. I glanced at the seat number again to be sure. 2A, exactly as on my ticket, exactly as I remembered. "I think you're in my seat," I said quietly, not wanting to turn this into theater. He looked up again, longer this time. I saw those eyes clearly, tired but not from lack of sleep, from ambition, bright but not from intelligence, from calculation. He glanced at my ticket, smirked, and curled one side of his lip. "There are plenty of seats," he said, annoyed. "You can take another one. I need to sit here. I have important work." It heard that line more times than he could imagine. My whole life revolved around people with important work, busy directors, busy producers, busy leading actors, busy agents. Everyone was so busy, their time seemed more valuable than the people around them. His sentence wasn't new. It just landed on a worn-out spot inside me. A flight attendant approached, seeing two men staring each other down. She smiled professionally, asked what the issue was. Before I could answer, he turned to her, switching instantly to that friendly but commanding tone. "He can move to another seat, right? I need this one to work. It's a long flight. I'm already settled." She looked at me, then at the ticket, then at the seat number. I saw the hesitation in her eyes, a look I'd seen many times, torn between rules and important passengers, between right and convenient. She recognized me. I noticed it in the slight widening of her eyes, the quick blink, but she said nothing. Service work teaches people to hide everything behind a smile. "Sir, we can arrange another seat," she began softly. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at the man again, the way he leaned deeper into the seat, claiming it, the way his fingers tapped impatiently on the tray, certain he had already won. He didn't know who I was, didn't care. In his mind, I was just an old man stubborn about a seat. The funny thing was, in that moment, I felt light. For the first time in a long while, I was in a situation where my name meant nothing. Not a star, not a director, not a legend. Just a man asking whether basic respect still meant something. "I paid for this seat," I said slowly. "I don't want anyone in trouble. I just want to sit in the place that's mine." He laughed short, sharp, slightly sour. "You don't get it," he muttered. "In this world, the seat belongs to whoever sits faster." That line burned itself into my memory, not because it was clever, but because it was honest, an unconscious confession of a generation that believes everything is a competition: seats, chances, people, respect. What he didn't know was this: sometimes the old man standing in front of you didn't just pay for a seat. He bought the plane. But I didn't say it, not because I couldn't, but because I was starting to understand something. This moment didn't come to teach him a lesson. It came to teach me one. I didn't answer him right away. For a moment, I just stood there, holding my boarding pass like it weighed more than the years on my back. The flight attendants waited for me to decide what kind of old man I was going to be that day. The quiet one, the difficult one, the one who makes a scene. You'd be surprised how fast people want to put you in a box when your hair turns white. "I can move you to 3C, sir," the flight attendant whispered. "It's still first class. First class. Same champagne, same blanket, same polite smile, different message." Because if I said yes, I wasn't just changing seats. I was telling that man and everyone watching that he was right, that the world belongs to whoever pushes hardest, talks loudest, sits down first, that respect is negotiable, and I was willing to bargain mine away for a quieter flight. I looked at 3C. It was fine. It was comfortable. It was safe. I'd spent a lifetime in seats like that, on movie sets, in meetings, in rooms where people praised my work but didn't hear a word I said. I'd let them cut corners, push limits, cross lines, just to keep things moving, to avoid another fight, to stay professional, to not be difficult. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about a plane, or a seat, or some arrogant kid who thought speed meant ownership. This was about me. I had built a career playing men who stood their ground. Men who didn't blink. Men who walked into saloons, courtrooms, battlefields, and drew a line nobody crossed. People worshipped those characters, quoted them, framed their words. But the man standing in front of 2A that afternoon had spent a lot of years quietly moving to 3C, not just in planes, in life. The revelation didn't come like thunder. It came like a whisper that had been chasing me for decades. You've let people take more than seats from you. You've let them take your time, your peace, parts of your voice. And every time you told yourself it wasn't worth the trouble, I looked at the man in my seat. For the first time, I really saw him, not as a villain, not as some cartoon of entitlement, just as another human being who had been told the same lie: this world sells everyone. If you can grab it, it's yours. Maybe nobody ever pushed back. Maybe every door opened just because he walked toward it with enough confidence. Maybe he grew up thinking no was for other people. But here's the thing. I wasn't other people. What he didn't know, what nobody in that cabin knew, was that I didn't just buy a ticket years ago. I'd invested heavily in the airline, quietly. No press releases, no photo ops. I didn't need my name on the side of the plane to know what I owned. On paper, that seat, that row, that cabin, that plane, all of it was partly mine. And still, I was the one being asked to move. That was the real punch in the gut. Not that he took my spot, but that I almost let him. With all my years, all my experience, all my so-called power, my first instinct was still to step aside. In that narrow aisle, with the carpet under my boots and the engines humming outside, I understood something ugly and simple. You can own the plane and still live like a man who doesn't believe he deserves the seat. That was the revelation. Not that he was arrogant, but that I had been absent in my own life, in my own authority, in my own sense of worth. And I knew, right then, that if I backed down again, it wouldn't just be one more small compromise. It would be proof that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped believing in the man I pretended to be on screen. So I took a breath, and for the first time in a long time, I decided 2A was not just a number on a board. It was a line in the sand. I wish I could tell you I handled it like one of those men I used to play. Cool, sharp, one line. Problem solved. I didn't. For a second, my throat closed. The aisle felt narrower. The air felt thinner. It was as if the cabin had tilted just a little and I was the only one who noticed. I could hear ice clinking in glasses, pages turning, someone laughing 3 rows back while something inside me quietly cracked. "It'll take 3C, I almost heard myself say. The sentence formed fully in my head, like an old reflex reaching for the same excuse it had used 1,000 times. It's not worth it. Let it go. Sit down. Be quiet. Get through the flight. My fingers tightened around the boarding pass. The paper bent. The edges dug into my palm. It was ridiculous. Really a grown man, fighting tears over a seat he technically owned 10 times over. But that's the thing about breaking points. They never show up dressed as tragedies. They arrive inside small humiliations that look harmless from the outside. "I can move you, sir," the flight attendant said again, softer this time. I heard the pleading in her voice, not against me, but against conflict. Against yet another story she'd have to tell in the crew room about the old guy and the entitled passenger. My chest felt heavy. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was tired. Tired in a way that didn't come from age or jet lag, but from years of swallowing words that should have been spoken. Years of letting people talk over me, because silence was easier than having to prove myself all over again. I looked down at my hands. These were the hands that had held fake guns and real awards. Hands that had signed contracts, pointed cameras, built characters that people around the world called strong. And here they were, shaking, just a little, because I was about to decide whether I still believed in that word. I broke, not loudly, not in a way anyone would replay on social media. I broke in that small, private way a person breaks when they realize how many times they've betrayed themselves without even noticing. A heat rose in my chest, not from anger, but from shame. Not shame at him, shame at me. How many times had I moved to 3C in my life? How many times had I let someone talk to me or to the people I cared about like we were furniture they could rearrange? How many times had I told myself, "You're above this," when really I was just afraid of being the one who insisted on respect? My heart thumped heavier. The engines outside roared to life. Someone pushed a suitcase into the overhead bin a little too hard. The latch slammed shut, and the sound jolted through me like a gunshot. I couldn't breathe. That's what it felt like. Not because the cabin was low on oxygen, because I was standing in the exact spot where every compromise ID ever made seemed to gather and stare back at me. In that moment, I didn't see an arrogant stranger in my seat. I saw every director who'd told me I was lucky to be here. Every executive who thought they owned my time because they'd written a check. Every journalist who reduced my life to a headline. Every person who confused my patience with weakness. And I saw myself over and over, nodding, smiling, letting it slide. Something inside me tore open. I realized that if I backed down again, it wouldn't matter how many planes I owned, how many movies I'd made, how many awards sat gathering dust at home. I would go to my grave knowing that when the moment came to stand my ground, really stand it, I chose the aisle. My jaw tightened. I felt the old version of me, the one from posters and scenes and one-liners, staring at me from somewhere in the back of my mind, not as a hero, as a question. Are you the man they think you are, or are you just acting? I took a breath, slow, heavy, and for the first time in a long time, I decided I was done playing the part of the man who steps aside. The breakdown was simple. Either I stayed standing for myself, or I sat down and watched the last piece of me that still believed in dignity quietly die at 30,000 feet. I chose not to die that day. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. There's a certain kind of silence that falls over a room when people realize something real is about to happen. I felt that silence settle over the cabin. The clinking stopped. The small talk faded. Even the engines outside seemed to hum lower, like the whole plane was leaning in. "I want take 3C, I said. The flight attendant blinked, surprised. She wasn't used to that answer. Most people just moved. Easier that way. Quicker, cleaner. This is my seat. I continued, looking at the man in 2A, not at her. I paid for it. It's on my ticket, and I am not moving. He leaned back, arms crossing over his chest, giving me that look young men reserve for rules they think don't apply to them. "Sir, I already sat down," he said. "You've set up my work. It's just a seat. Don't make this a big deal." There it was. The line people use when they want you to swallow something you shouldn't. Don't make this a big deal. I let his words hang there for a second. "That's the problem," I replied. "You think it's not a big deal. You think sitting in something that doesn't belong to you is just efficient. You think pushing someone out of the way is just being decisive. You think taking isn't taking if the person you're taking from is too polite to fight back." His face tightened. For the first time, he really looked at me, not the old man, the man. "You don't understand how the world works," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "I understand it perfectly. I've watched it for 90-some years. I could have brought up the airline. I could have mentioned ownership, investments, shares, boards. It would have ended the conversation in 1 second. The flight attendant would have apologized. The man would have stumbled over some excuse, and everyone would have clapped silently in their heads for the powerful man defending himself with power. But that wasn't the lesson I needed, and it wasn't the lesson he needed either. This isn't about status, I said. This is about respect. If you think the world belongs to whoever grabs fastest, you're going to spend your life stealing seats and wondering why you're still empty inside when you land. He scoffed, but there was less confidence in it now. The flight attendant shifted her weight, torn between schedules and conscience. People were watching. Phones were out, but low, half hidden. That's the era we live in. Everyone ready to record, no one ready to step in. I didn't give a speech. I didn't deliver a movie monologue. I just said what I wish someone had said to me when I was his age. Listen. One day, you'll be the one standing in the aisle, wondering when exactly you stopped recognizing the man you've become. It won't be because of one big sin. It'll be because of 1,000 small things you told yourself were no big deal. He stared at me, jaw clenched. For a moment, we were just two men, not a villain and a hero, not young and old, not rich and richer. Just two human beings standing in front of a very simple question. Who are you? When nobody forces you to do the right thing. The lesson hit me as hard as it hit him. Dignity isn't what the world gives you. It's what you refuse to sell, even when the price looks reasonable. I wasn't trying to humiliate him. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to draw a line for both of us. You can keep the seat, I said finally, if you're willing to look me in the eye and say you deserve it more than I do. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the boarding pass still crumpled in my hand, looked at the number above his head. Then, slowly, the fight drained out of his shoulders. He unbuckled his belt, stood up, cleared his throat. It's your seat, he muttered. Ill move. No applause, no soundtrack. Just the soft click of his belt, the rustle of him sliding into 3C, and the quiet weight of a plane full of people who had just watched something very old-fashioned and very rare. A man choosing respect over convenience. That, more than any title, any ownership, any name on a screen was the only power worth keeping. When I finally sat down in 2A, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a mirror. The leather was the same as any other seat in that cabin. Same legroom, same little pillow waiting to be ignored, same window looking out over the wing. But there was a difference I could feel in my bones. I hadn't inherited that spot from fame or money or fear. It'd taken it back from a version of myself that had been stepping aside for too long. The man in 3C stayed quiet. He avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in whatever was on his laptop screen. Every now and then, I could feel his glance brush past me, full of something between embarrassment and confusion, not hatred, not resentment, just the raw discomfort of seeing himself for the first time the way the world sees him. I knew that feeling. ID had it too. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration played. I watched the flight attendant buckle and unbuckle her belt with practiced calm, and I wondered how many small battles she had watched in this cabin, how many times Shed had to choose between rules and convenience, between right and smooth. When the engines roared and we started to move, I turned my head toward the window. The runway lights blurred into long white lines. The sky was folding into evening, a thin strip of orange fading at the horizon. As we lifted off, the city shrank, and with it, a little of the noise inside me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cleaner. You don't change at 90 overnight. You don't walk off a plane a brand new man. But something subtle shifted. A weight I didn't know I was carrying slid a little off my shoulders. Not because it'd put someone in their place, but because, for once, I hadn't left mine. I thought about all the young men like him, smart, fast, hungry, taught that success means never apologizing, never backing down, never yielding an inch. Taught that kindness is weakness and humility is for people who lose, they errant monsters. They're just following instructions the world keeps drilling into them. And I thought about my own generation. How many of us traded tenderness for toughness, silence for stoicism, respect for control? We built empires, careers, reputations, and somewhere along the way forgot how to simply say, "This isn't right," without needing an audience to clap. Somewhere over the country, when the cabin lights dimmed and most people slipped on headphones or closed their eyes, I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the engines. A flight attendant passed by and paused. "Do you need anything, Mr. Eastwood?" she asked softly. For years, that question always meant more champagne, a different pillow, a faster car waiting on the tarmac. This time, I understood I needed something much simpler. "No," I said. "I am fine. Thank you." But what I meant was, I am finally okay with taking up the space that's mine. No more, no less. I glanced toward 3C. The man was staring at the ceiling, headphones in, hands folded together. He looked smaller than when Head marched onto the plane like he owned the sky. Not defeated, just human. I hoped, quietly, that one day Head'd be in a crowded room, or a tight hallway, or on another plane, and someone would try to move him aside in the name of no big deal. And, before he stepped away, he would remember an old man in 2A who made him switch seats without yelling, without threats, without dropping a single important name. Maybe then, He'd understand that the real lesson wasn't about hierarchy. It was about responsibility. Responsibility for the space you occupy. Responsibility for the people you brush past. Responsibility for the kind of man you choose to be when nobody's filming. By the time we began our descent into New York, I knew I hadn't just reclaimed a seat. I'd reclaimed a piece of myself I thought the years had quietly erased. That's the thing about transformation at my age. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with one quiet choice, made in a narrow aisle on an ordinary afternoon, 30,000 feet above the ground. And once you make it, you don't see the world the same way again. Somewhere between leaving the runway and touching down again, I realized the moment on that plane wasn't really about confrontation. It wasn't about proving a point, or holding on to pride, or teaching a stranger how the world should work. It was about understanding how easily a man can drift away from himself without ever noticing. ID spent decades telling stories about strength, stories about men who knew who they were, men who stood their ground even when the ground shook. But life has a strange way of sandpapering your edges, making you quieter, smaller, more accommodating than you ever meant to be. Not out of fear, but out of habit. When that man took my seat, he wasn't stealing leather and legroom, and he was stepping into a space I had stopped defending long before I boarded the plane. And reclaiming it felt less like winning and more like remembering. Remembering that dignity is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not something you hold up like a trophy. It's a quiet alignment with the part of yourself you stopped listening to. By the time the wheels hit the ground in New York, I knew something I hadn't known in years. I was still capable of choosing who I wanted to be. This world teaches us to move fast, to take what we can, to apologize only when cornered. It rewards the bold, the loud, the unyielding. But somewhere underneath all of that noise lives a truth we keep forgetting. Power without respect is just theft with better clothes. Every day, we cross paths with people fighting silent battles. The exhausted mother, the aging worker, the young man desperate to prove he matters, the old man who's been told to shrink himself to make space for the new. We underestimate each other because it's easier than seeing the full weight of another person's life. But respect, that's the currency that keeps the world from collapsing in on itself. Not the forced kind, not the transactional kind, the simple kind. The kind that says, I see you, and I won't take what isn't mine. It starts small, a seat, a moment, a decision, and it grows into the kind of character that outlives careers, mistakes, and even time. If there's one truth worth carrying, it's this. Life gives us endless opportunities to choose the kind of person we are, especially when nobody is watching. When the cabin doors opened and passengers rushed out, I stayed seated for a moment, letting the aisle clear. People moved past me, unaware that anything unusual had happened. And maybe that's the point. The biggest shifts in our lives rarely make headlines. They happen quietly, inside the small corners of an ordinary day. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and stepped into the jet bridge with a steadier breath than Ed had in years. Not because Edie kept a seat, but because I, Dee, kept myself. If you're still listening, then maybe this story wasn't about a flight at all. Maybe it was about you. About the times you stepped aside when you shouldn't have. About the moments you let someone take something from you because silence felt easier than truth. About the part of you that knows deep down that respect isn't earned by force, but by honesty. So here's the line I'll leave you with, the only one that matters. If someone takes your seat, don't fight for the chair. Fight for the part of you that still believes you deserve to sit there.